Have you ever heard of a man so disciplined he made a vow never to touch a woman until marriage, and kept it? But what if I told you that very vow was the beginning of his curse? Welcome to the hidden heart of West Africa, to a village where whispers carry weight and every promise echoes beyond time. This is the untold story of Ezekiah, the pride of Kenja, whose strength became his burden and whose love was nearly his undoing. When he met Ibrahy Trari, daughter of the president, a forbidden love awakened forces older than memory. What followed was not romance, but fear, flight, and fire. And at the center of it all, a broken oath to the gods, and a mother's desperate journey to save her only son. This is not just a love story, it's a legend about sacrifice, spiritual debt, and the power of truth to burn or to heal. Watch until the end to uncover how one forgotten promise shaped the fate of an entire family, and what it took to reclaim love from the hands of a curse. In the heart of West Africa, nestled among the whispering grasslands of Kenja, there lived a boy whose silence echoed louder than the village drums. His name was Ezekiah. To the world he was handsome, humble, almost sacred. But to his mother, Amma, he was something more, a living promise. They said he was born beneath a night sky so clear even the stars stopped to stare. The only son of a widow, Ezekiah grew under the shadow of a sacred vow, one whispered into his ears each night by a mother who had lost everything but her faith. "My son," she would say, her voice both prayer and warning. "True strength lives not in the body but in the soul that can resist." And resist he did. While other young men of Kenja boasted about conquests and chased fleeting desires, Ezekiah walked a quieter path. He spoke little, but when he did, it was with purpose. His eyes, always lowered in respect, missed nothing. The girls admired him, not just for his looks, tall as a baobab, skin like polished riverstone, but for the mystery he wore like a second skin. The elders praised his discipline. The men watched him with a mix of pride and unease. For in a world where indulgence was often mistaken for manhood, Ezekiah's restraint was revolutionary. He had taken a vow to never touch a woman unless she was his wife. It was a rare promise, almost mythical in a time when self-control had been traded for self-satisfaction. But for Ezekiah, it wasn't about virtue signaling. It was about legacy, honor, and something much older than either. A story Amma had once told him, of gods who cursed those who took what was not yet theirs. What no one knew, not even Ezekiah himself, was that this vow, this proud silence, this careful control, was the only thing holding back a storm. And the day he met her, the one girl who could unlock everything, was the day the winds began to shift. The boy of discipline would soon become the man of legend. But legends, as we know, are often born from broken truths, and this one was destined to bleed. Shall we go deeper? It began like any other morning. The air was thick with the scent of grilled yams and dewy earth. Birds sang their usual tunes, weaving melodies through the tall acacia trees. The villagers of Kenja moved about with quiet joy, unaware that today, the course of one man's destiny was about to bend. And it bent the moment Ezekiah, chest glistening with sweat from the fields, stepped into the village square and saw her. She stood by the well, a pitcher balanced effortlessly on her hip, wrapped in sunlight and silence. Her skin shimmered like caramel poured over stone. Her presence was unlike anything Kenja had ever known, elegant, poised, yet undeniably grounded. And then she looked up. Her eyes, they weren't just eyes, they were moons, dark, full, and ancient, like they remembered 1,000 lives before this one. For the first time in his young life, Ezekiah forgot to breathe. The world around him blurred, the hum of life in the village faded, and all that remained was her. She smiled, and with that smile, something cracked, not shattered, but trembled. The fortress he had built around himself, made of discipline, duty, and dignity, wavered like dry grass in the wind. Ezekiah had always believed desire was a force to be tamed. But in that instant he realized, some forces do not come to be controlled, they come to awaken. Her name was Ibrahy Trari. She was not from Kenya. She was the daughter of Captain Ibrahy Trari, the president of Bokhina Fasho, a man as feared as he was respected, whose wisdom extended beyond borders, and whose silence often spoke more than 1,000 decrees. Ibrahy had come to Kenya seeking quiet, protection, perhaps even purpose. What she found instead was a gaze that met her not as a soldier's daughter, but as a woman fully seen. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. In Kenya, where the winds carried secrets and the trees whispered fates, silence was often louder than sound, and so, without warning, the story began, not just of two lovers, but of two legacies colliding. For while Ibrahy was bound by a vow of restraint, Ibrahy was guarded by a father who saw everything. Everything. Except this. The wedding was like nothing Kenya had seen in decades. Drums roared into the night, echoing across the hills like thunderclaps of joy. Elders raised their calabashes high, blessing the union with palm wine and ancient words. Young girls danced, with flower-strewn hair, while the boys lit torches that turned the village square into a sea of firelight. Ibrahy was radiant, wrapped in flowing fabric, adorned with cowries and gold. Ibrahy stood beside her, solemn yet proud, cloaked in deep indigo, a color once worn only by kings. The people rejoiced. They believed this was more than a wedding. It was a merging of worlds, of tradition and leadership, of spirit and state. The disciplined son of Kenya and the daughter of a president. Love and legacy wrapped in one unforgettable night. But what began in celebration ended in silence. As the chants faded and the last flame died, the door to the nuptial hut creaked, shut behind them. Alone now, the bride and groom faced each other, not as icons of a perfect union, but as two young souls beneath unbearable expectations. Ibrahy's heart pounded, a rhythm of both hope and fear. She had prepared herself for this night, as all daughters are taught to do, with quiet pride and hidden worry. But nothing could have prepared her for the storm that awaited behind Ibrahy's eyes. There were no words, only rushed breath, stiff gestures, and hands that trembled between desire and desperation. His touch was not cruel, but it was chaotic, wild, untrained, as though he were wrestling something inside that he didn't understand. Ibrahy whispered his name, Ibrahy, but he didn't answer. His silence was louder than a scream. She pushed him away and fled the hut like a woman escaping fire. Dust rose beneath her bare feet as she ran through the village in her wedding wrap, tears streaking down her cheeks. She pounded on Amma's door, breathless, broken. He's not like other men, Mama, he doesn't stop. Inside the dim hut, Amma held her close, stroking her hair, voice trembling but calm. My daughter, she said softly. It was his first time too. He's just nervous, he will learn. But something in Amma's voice betrayed her eyes, because deep down, even she knew. This was not the awkwardness of youth. It was something else, something darker. By the third night, the whispers in Kenya had grown louder than the drums had ever been. The second attempt had ended worse than the first. Ibrahy had screamed. Not out of modesty, not from shock, but terror. She said his eyes changed, that something flickered behind them, dark and unnatural. Ibrahym's movements weren't just clumsy. They were erratic, urgent, possessed. This time, when she pushed him away, she didn't just flee to Amma's hut. She threatened never to come back. The third night, she didn't scream at all. No argument, no plea, just silence. At dawn, she tied her belongings with shaking hands and walked straight to her father's house. Her ceremonial gown was stained with dust, her eyes hollow, her body exhausted. Captain Ibrahy Trari didn't ask questions. He didn't raise his voice or demand an explanation. He simply opened his arms and held his daughter, as only a father, and then he made a single call. No one knew what was said. But from that moment on, Ibrahy's hut remained empty. The pride of Kenya had become its mystery. Some whispered of possession, others blamed lust or madness. But Amma, his mother, felt the truth gnawing at her like an old wound. This wasn't about passion, this was deeper, older. She had raised him with dignity, with restraint, yet now he was like a man at war with himself, unable to bear the weight of not knowing. Amma made a decision. At dawn, with only a bundle on her back, she walked into the forests alone, through the rain, across swollen rivers. For 2 days she pressed forward, guided not by sight, but by memory, toward a name no one dared whisper aloud. Grandfather Zobu, the seer of Kenja. He lived atop a ridge surrounded by black stones and silence. His hut was hung with bones, his eyes cloudy but burning. "You've come for your son," he said before Amma could even speak. She fell to her knees, recounting every cry, every failed night, every scream that haunted the village. Zobu listened, unmoved, until at last he spoke, voice like dry leaves in wind. "You cannot cheat the gods and expect no price." And in a rush, it all came flooding back. The prayer, the offering, the vow they had made years ago at the shrine of the goddess Alanu, to sacrifice 3 bulls if their child was born healthy. But her husband died. She had forgotten. Now the gods had not. Zobu's gaze did not waver. "Your son," he said slowly, "is the child of a broken promise, and the gods do not forget." The next morning, Amma returned to Kenja. Soaked in rain, her feet blistered, her spirit heavy. But in her hands she held more than just a gourd and a bundle of sacred herbs. She carried the truth, and a debt that had waited too long to be paid. She didn't speak to anyone, she didn't rest. She went straight to the village chief, her head wrapped in black cloth, her back straight with resolve. "I'm selling the land," she said. It was her husband's last gift, a small plot, passed down through generations, a memory wrapped in soil. The elders tried to stop her, neighbors whispered that grief had driven her mad. But Amma would not be moved. She knew what the gods required. With the money she bought 3 bulls, strong, beautiful creatures, eyes wide with innocence. She met their gaze before the journey, as if asking forgiveness for what was to come. Then, with 2 porters and a sacred drummer, she walked again. This time toward the shrine of Alanu, nestled beneath the ancient baobab, the same place where the forgotten vow was first made. There, the priests awaited her. They remembered. Without delay, the ritual began. Drums pounded like a heartbeat against the dry earth. Incantations spilled from the priest's lips in a tongue older than memory. One by one, the bulls were brought forward. The sacred blade shimmered. Blood was spilled, hot, red, and final. As the last bull fell, a strange wind swept through the sanctuary. It whispered through Amma's scarf, curling around her ears like a sigh. Perhaps it was forgiveness. Back in Kenja that night, Ezekiah slept. No sweat, no trembling, no screams in the dark. Instead, a dream. He saw himself as a child sitting by the river in Amma's lap. A woman's voice, soft and otherworldly, hummed a lullaby. He didn't know the voice, but it felt divine. He awoke in silence, calm, not cured, not yet. But for the first time he felt light. He didn't understand what had changed, but his soul did. The fire was still there, but now it no longer burned to consume. It burned to be understood, and that was just the beginning. Even with the sacrifice complete, the weight of Ezekiah's past still clung to him like dust after a storm. Though the nightmares had faded, the village had not forgotten. Rumors, once whispered in shadows, now walked freely in daylight. They still called him the madman of the hut. Children who once admired him now avoided his gaze. Women who once dreamt of his touch now crossed the road when he passed. The shame, though unspoken, hung in the air like smoke. And so, one quiet morning, Ezekiah did what few expected. He journeyed north to Kada, a distant village where the hills breathed herbal scents, and the women were known as keepers of forgotten wisdom. There, among the terraced gardens and wild medicinal groves, he saw her, Ayela, a healer. Barefoot in tall grass, arms full of calabashes, her copper bracelets chiming with each step. Her gaze was unflinching, neither curious nor cautious. Just calm. Izakaya froze. She didn't. "You're Izakaya," she said, not as a question but as if she already knew everything. And then, for the first time, Izakaya didn't hide. He told her everything, about the vow, the curse, the women who fled, screaming into the night. About the bulls, the blood, and the goddess who gave but never forgot. About how he had become both feared and pitied in his own land. Ayala listened. No shock, no pity, just presence. Over days they walked the hills together, gathering herbs, talking beneath trees, laughing in sudden rains. Izakaya, who once held back every emotion like a dam, found himself opening without fear. With Ayala, there was no need to conquer, only to connect. She didn't run, she stayed. Their wedding was simple, no fireworks, no feasts. Just hands held under a full moon, and two spirits saying yes in silence. That night, in her small hut of bamboo and clay, Izakaya touched her not like a man battling himself, but like one returning home. No screams, no slamming doors, only gentle sighs, fingers interlaced, and a silence full of understanding. The next morning, Ayala stepped outside, clay pot in hand, sweat on her brow. The village women watched her from a distance, wide-eyed, waiting. "You stayed," one whispered. Ayala smiled. This was never about strength, she said, wiping her brow. It was about timing, and hers, it seemed, had finally come. Izakaya was no longer the madman of the hut. Now he was Ayala's chosen. The wind over Kenja changed, not in sound but in spirit. It no longer whispered rumors, no longer carried fear. It carried something gentler now. Respect, maybe even reverence. Izakaya had changed. He no longer avoided his reflection or walked, with his shoulders hunched in shame. With Ayala beside him, he returned to Kenja not as a shadow of a cursed legend, but as a man reborn. Not perfect, not fearless, but whole. He helped in her healing work, learning to mix herbs, to listen to pain not just with his ears but with his soul. Villagers who once crossed the road now sought his counsel. Mothers sent their sons to him. Children tugged on his robes, offering mangoes and shy smiles. Even the nickname, the madman of the hut, died quietly, buried by time and truth. They now called him Ayala's chosen. And Amma? She laughed again. Not the small, polite laugh she'd worn like a mask, but the full, deep laugh of a woman who had walked through shame, through sacrifice, and returned with her son not just alive, but light-filled. Sometimes, she would sit beneath the sacred baobab, where the pact was first made and finally honored, and offer new blessings, fresh flowers, sweet wine, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. As for Captain Ibrahy Trari, he watched from afar, but never from indifference. In the quiet of his private courtyard in Ouagadougou, surrounded by mango trees and stone lions, he kept a framed photo of Amma and Izakaya on his desk. A reminder that even presidents are fathers, that even strength must bow to spirit, and that some battles aren't won with weapons, but with truth, repentance, and love. He sent word to the elders in the north, calling off the silent watch once placed on Izakaya. He ordered the path to the sacred baobab restored, so others might walk the road of redemption more easily. And so the story, once feared as a curse, became something else entirely. A tale not of possession, but of healing. Not of disgrace, but of destiny. Because sometimes legends aren't forged in fire. They're born in silence, grown in sacrifice, and carried forward by love. Some stories fade when the credits roll, but this one lingers because behind every so-called madman might be a promise that was never kept. A mother who broke alone, or a love waiting in silence to be understood, not feared. Izakaya's journey reminds us that healing isn't instant. It's earned, through tears, truth, and trembling hands that still reach for grace. Ayala didn't save him by fighting the fire. She saved him by staying. And Captain Ibrahy Trari. In the end, he wasn't just a president or a soldier. He was a father, watching, protecting, and finally, letting go. So the next time you hear a whisper, ask yourself, is it just gossip or the beginning of a legend? And maybe, just maybe, you'll look at love, pain, and promises a little differently. Because some curses aren't born in darkness. They're born in love. And love, when true, always finds a way home.